Question number 2, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to ensure that students with additional support needs receive adequate resources and tailored educational support.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that all students with a disability, long-term medical condition or additional support needs are supported as they study in further and higher education. The Equality Act 2010 places a specific duty on colleges and universities to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that disabled students can access education and any related services. We've also opened up living cost support to disabled students who are studying full-time distance learning courses who are unable to study campus-based courses because of their disability.
Mackay.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Can the Minister outline what progress has been made around colleges and universities that builds on the measures currently in place to support students with additional support needs?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, in 23-24, the number of full-time higher education students with disabilities or additional support needs who were supported by DSA increased to 5,855, a 5.4% increase over the year. And that totals £14.1 million in support, again an increase of 18.4% over the year. The data also shows that we now have a record number of new students at university with a recorded disability or additional support need. And in our colleges, there was a record level of learning hours in Scotland's colleges delivered to learners with a declared disability, an increase of 2 percentage points over the year. Colleges and universities continue to offer a range of support directly to students with additional support needs, implementing reasonable adjustments and providing support with exams and assessments. But of course, we and they aspire to do more.
Brief supplementary, Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The last time the Government consulted on a review of support for disabled students was in 2019, and since then the landscape has changed. One of the recommendations of that review was to establish a forum to look at disability-related issues in further and higher education. So can I ask the Minister if this is something he's considering setting up, and would he meet with me to discuss it?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, as the members are aware, we are committed to looking at a range of issues around student support, disabled students, all students in fact. On the point of the forum, I'm more than happy to meet the member to discuss these issues. I think it's a reasonable point. I would be keen, however, to extend that, if possible, to look at apprenticeships as well.
Question number 3, Douglas Lumsden.
The Scottish Government what is being done to address the reported shortage of forensic pathologists across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There are 14 forensic pathologists in Scotland covering the services required by the Crown Office in their deaths investigations, and the Crown Office confirms that there have been no significant delays to post-mortems that require a forensic specialist. There are currently 4 forensic pathology training posts in Scotland, and the Crown Office is engaged in supporting the Royal College of Pathologists training programmes.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I am surprised that the Lord Advocate, who is responsible for the service, is not here to answer the question today. Because in the North East, I believe there are now no forensic pathologists employed, resulting in agency pathologists being flown into the city for a day's work, resulting in huge costs and long delays for families looking for answers. I also heard of bodies being transferred to other parts of Scotland without the family's knowledge. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, how have the Scottish Government allowed this crisis in forensic pathology to happen, and what will be done to tackle the inadequate training provision to train and retain people within Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Douglas Lumsden for his question. I understand the serious issues that he narrates. The pathology services in the north of Scotland were previously provided by the University of Aberdeen. However, NHS Grampian House has now taken over provision of toxicology and histopathology services in that area, and the Health Board is also working to establish a forensic pathology service. In the meantime, appropriate forensic pathology coverage is being delivered by locums and by the other service providers in Scotland. And I also point Mr Lumsden to my earlier answer in terms of the training places that are available, and if he requires any further detail, I'm happy to either provide in writing or in a further discussion in a meeting.
Question number 4, Meghan Gallacher.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to the nightclub industry in light of the Nighttime Industries Association's launch of the Last Night Out campaign.
Minister Tom Arthur.
A vibrant, high-value, quality nighttime sector is important to our economy. We will continue to do all we can to support businesses to thrive. We are already freezing the basic property rate in 2024-25 and provide a package of reliefs worth an estimated £685 million, including the Small Business Bonus Scheme, the most generous relief of its kind in the UK. Indeed, we estimate around half of the properties in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors are eligible for 100% relief in 2024-25. The Deputy First Minister met with the Nighttime Industries Association on 15 November to discuss current challenges and solutions, and that engagement will continue.
Meghan Gallacher.
More than 3 UK clubs are closing every week, and all UK nightclubs are in danger of closing by the end of the decade. During the summer, I met with business owner Donna McLeod at one of my old haunts, the Cat House Rock Club, and we spoke about the lack of support that businesses receive to allow our nighttime economy to thrive. We mentioned low emission zones, lack of public transport, lack of rates relief for businesses, and the decline of towns, high streets and city centres. The nighttime industry is being dismantled brick by brick. The government should back the Last Night Out campaign to help support significant nightclubs like the Catty. So the question I'd like to ask the Minister, will he save the rave?
Minister.
Well, can I commend the member on her excellent taste in nightclubs. I too frequented the Cat House and Voodoo before that when I was younger, and I had hair just as long as the member at that time as well. So let me say I very much appreciate the sincerity of the points that she makes, and I know her personal commitment to this area as convener of the cross-party group on town centres as well. The Government is committed to working constructively with industry, with the night times industry and those across hospitality and leisure, and indeed as part of a range of interventions. We are supporting our town centres, our city centres. This is a priority for the Government. With regards to our regulatory and fiscal measures, these will be set out in due course, not of course at the budget next week with regards to tax policy, but I am committed to engaging with businesses, and I'm more than happy to meet with the member, or any other member for that matter, who wants to work constructively to ensure our nighttime industries are supported.
Question number 5, Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its policies and collaboration with local authorities to ensure that support is provided to pupils who cannot attend school for medical reasons.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
Where illness leads to children and young people being absent from school for a prolonged period, Section 40 of the Standards in Scotland Schools Act 2000 places a statutory duty on education authorities to make special arrangements for pupils to receive their education elsewhere than at school, for example at home or in a hospital. We have published guidance for local authorities on this matter, providing advice on the roles and responsibilities of local authorities, hospitals and other services regarding children unable to attend due to ill health.
Colette Stevenson.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for that update. I have been contacted by a few families in East Kilbride who are concerned about the lasting impact of COVID, particularly around mental health on children and young people, some of whom have not been able to attend school on a regular basis. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what consideration has been given to exchanging best practice across the country in terms of integrating pupils back into school after absence due to ill health, as well as any work underway to support parents, guardians and indeed teachers to help put mixed model learning into action where this would be appropriate to ensure young people can achieve their full potential?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank the member for raising what I think is a really important issue. She will be aware that during the pandemic there was additional support provided by the Government to local authorities to help young people in that transition back into formal education. But the ongoing impacts of the pandemic remain very acute in some of our schools. We are looking and considering at the current time a review of the updated guidance that I alluded to in my original answer. However, the member talks about the role of parents in this regard, and I think that's hugely important. We are already rolling out a new approach in terms of our national support for parents across the country, and I will take the issue the member has raised today back to officials to look at what more we might be able to do on the specific issue relating to COVID and facilitating that support post-pandemic.
Question number 6, Rachel Hamilton.
The Scottish Government what its response is to the cross-border connection proposals for the Scottish borders.
Minister Alistair Allen.
Regulation of electricity networks is reserved to the UK Government. Scottish ministers have devolved responsibility for determining applications for consent under the Electricity Act 1989. Given this, it is not appropriate for me to comment on individual infrastructure projects that may come forward, so as not to interfere with or prejudice any decisions that may come before Scottish ministers for determination. However, the Scottish Government in general recognises that the expansion of the electricity grid will play a crucial role in delivering our energy ambitions and maximising the economic opportunities of Scotland's abundant renewable resources.
Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, Borders residents are inundated with energy developments, and communities now face over 75 kilometres of pylons stretching right through the Scottish borders. I'll be chairing a virtual village hall meeting in the coming weeks, giving locals a chance to voice their legitimate concerns directly to Scottish Power. So, will the Scottish Government stand with residents and ensure no plans proceed against the will of local communities in the Scottish borders? Minister.
The National Planning Framework makes clear that potential impacts on communities, and the member has alluded to them, although, as I say, I can't comment on the specific case. But the National Planning Framework makes clear that potential impacts on communities, nature and heritage, including the cumulative effects of developments, are important considerations in the decision-making process. And she will forgive me that I cannot, if I read right that there is an invitation in the question, that the Ministerial Code does prevent me from doing that. But I thank her for her question.
Question number 7, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what consultations is held with businesses in advance of the 25-26 budget.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
The Scottish Government has had a wide range of engagement at ministerial and official level to inform budget choices across all portfolios. This has included engaging with a number of business representative organisations and sector bodies and consideration of written representations received.
Jeremy Balfour.
Presiding Officer, the SNP Government do not understand business. Not my view, but the view of businesses across Scotland who feel the damage caused by years of SNP tax rises, anti-business regulations. If we want to see the Scottish economy grow, we have to support our businesses in that endeavour. My party wants to reverse the tide of rising taxes, starting with a fully costed plan to give pubs and businesses across Scotland full rates relief for 1 year. Will the Cabinet Secretary finally listen and do something positive for business in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, I don't accept Jeremy Balfour's characterisation of that at all, because a number of measures in the current budget already benefit businesses and properties in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, including freezing the basic property rate and the most generous small business bonus relief across the UK. And we estimate that around half of properties in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors will be eligible for 100% relief in 2024-25. And of course, decisions on non-domestic rates and reliefs for the 2025-26 budget will be considered in the context of the budget announcement next Wednesday.
Question number 8, Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government regarding the potential impact on Scotland's finances, how much it estimates will be raised in increased taxes in Scotland in 2025-26 as a result of the UK autumn budget.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
So, Scotland faces more than £2 billion in higher taxes next year as a result of the UK Government's autumn budget, largely driven by higher employers' national insurance contributions. The impact of employers' national insurance contribution increases in Scotland is estimated to be around £750 million for the public sector and the wider sectors contracted to provide and support public services such as GPs, social care, early learning and childcare providers. The Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations has also estimated that the third sector faces costs of around £75 million. The remainder of the employers' national insurance contributions increase will be borne by businesses across Scotland and will pose a serious challenge to many organisations and businesses.
Before I move to Mr Kidd's supplementary, I am aware there are a number of conversations going on across the chamber. I'd be grateful if those could end. Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As we know, a significant proportion of the higher taxes we're talking about come down to Labour's decision to increase national insurance contributions, as the Cabinet Secretary said. It's of deep concern that the UK Government now appears to be briefing that it will not cover the full cost of this national insurance increase to Scotland's public sector, which could potentially cost our public services hundreds of millions of pounds and who knows how many jobs. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any update regarding what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the impact this short-sighted Labour decision could have on our public services?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, if the figures that were reported this week are all that is provided, then that will mean that the Chancellor will be short-changing services that the public depend on by over £400 million. And that's a direct impact on GPs, social care, colleges, early learning and childcare, to name just a few. But of course, the UK Labour Government still has time to fix this and confirm that the full cost of their national insurance increase to the delivery of public services will be reimbursed, and we will be pursuing the UK Labour Government rigorously on that point.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Claire Ingalls was tortured and murdered in the home she shared with her young son. Her killer had been bailed from court 5 times despite dozens of convictions. Social services tried but failed to warn Claire that she was in danger. Claire's parents, Fiona and Ian, are still fighting for answers, and I previously raised their plight directly with this First Minister and his predecessor. They say we should not have to come to Parliament again, and on the 3rd anniversary of our beloved daughter's murder, to beg the First Minister for answers. We feel trapped and are unable to move on because we continue to be deprived of basic but vital information. So can the First Minister tell Fiona and Ian how much longer they must wait for the answers they deserve?
Minister.
First of all, let me express to Fiona and Ian my deepest sympathies at the loss of their beloved daughter. I cannot imagine the pain and the suffering and the agony that they have endured. Mr Finlay is correct. He has raised this issue with me before, and as a consequence of that, and he and I have exchanged correspondence on this issue, we've taken steps to ask Stirling Council to undertake further examination and exploration of the issues involved, to engage directly with Claire's parents, and obviously we will discuss these issues in this exchange today, and I remain committed to making sure that the family receive the answers that they understandably deserve.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. When I wrote to Mr Swinney on behalf of Claire's parents, he told me that he would reply soon, and that was 4 months ago. Is that really good enough? And the Ingalls family are far from alone in being failed by the justice system. Also in the chamber today is Denise Clare, who was raped by David Goodwillie and David Robertson. No credible explanation has ever been given as why the Crown Office did not prosecute. Frankly, the case stinks. Denise was forced to take civil action against the 2 men, and a judge agreed that she had been raped. She has since asked the government to fund a private criminal prosecution, but continues to be left in limbo. Denise has suffered for 13 long years, and here is her question to the First Minister. Will your government do the right thing and support the prosecution?
First Minister.
On the case of Claire Ingalls, I have engaged with Mr Finlay on this question, and we have made the request of Stirling Council to provide the satisfactory investigation that is required. But in the light of the exchanges that we've had today, I will look again at that issue to determine if there is further pressure we need to apply for Stirling Council to do exactly that. On the case of Denise Clare, obviously this is an issue which has been pursued through a civil action by Ms Clare, and the court has come to its judgment on that question. I am aware that she has made application for legal aid assistance to take forward, she's approached ministers for the steps necessary to ensure her case can be pursued as a private prosecution. That issue is being considered by the government, but I have to say to Mr Finlay today, I think the government has taken too long to consider the request that Ms Clare has made to us, And when I saw the news reports at the weekend, I asked for there to be greater urgency put into the engagement with our agents on this question, because I am dissatisfied with how long it has taken, and I express my apology through Mr Finlay to Mr Clare today.
Russell Finlay.
I'm sure Denise Clare will be pleased to hear that. And as Thomas Ross KC says, there's nothing complicated or complex about this decision. But we have the family of a murder victim who have no answers, and we have the double rape victim who has no answers. And it's actually typical of how victims are treated due to the SNP's weak justice agenda. The First Minister often cites judicial independence, but just this week he subverted judicial independence. 2 days ago, John Swinney and his colleagues sat right there, applauded themselves for passing a bad law to free thousands of criminals early from Scotland's prisons. This will result in more crime, more victims and more pressure on our police. Crucially, the SNP's new law does not give prison governors the power to block the release of those considered to be too dangerous. Why not?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think there are. I understand the significance of the cases that Mr Finlay puts to me today, but there are some fundamental points I need to put on the record about these cases. The issue of the granting of bail in the case of Claire Ingall's case, those are independent judgments arrived by the courts, and it is wrong for ministers to be involved in those cases. Now, I accept that there will be vigorous debate about the appropriateness of judgments, but these are decisions taken by the independent judiciary, and none of us want to have a judiciary that is anything other than independent. On the case of Denise Clare, there was a judgment arrived at by the Crown, who independently assessed the case for prosecution. Again, nobody, and I know that Mr Finlay would not be arguing for this, nobody accepts that those decisions should be taken by any process other than an independent process that can be undertaken. In relation to the legislation that Parliament has passed, Mr Finlay knows that the Government has had to come to this step because of the significant rise in the prison population, requiring ministers to ensure that our prisons are places of safety, especially for prison officers to work. And the reason why there is no a governor's veto is the Government has amended the timescale under which individuals will be released from prison. But we have put in significant safeguards to ensure that those convicted of domestic violence and serious assaults are not included in the release scheme that we have in place.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the SNP previously ordered the mass early release of prisoners, the Governor's veto was a vital safeguard. But John Swinney now thinks that he knows better than Scotland's prison governors. And people in the real world are looking at this in utter disbelief. Soft-touch SNP justice prioritises the rights and interests of dangerous criminals. Claire's mum, Fiona, told me there's something far wrong with Scotland's justice system when victims are kept in the dark and not treated as a priority. When it's releasing prisoners, the SNP rush through a law in days. When it's justice for victims, they leave them waiting for years. Does John Swinney have any regrets about his government's treatment of crime victims?
First Minister. Thank you.
Sir, I will always take seriously the concerns of victims and will take the action necessary to ensure that the interests of victims are fully and properly taken into account in all the steps that the Government takes. I would point out that in relation to the early release schemes that have been put in place before, there have been opportunities through the victim notification scheme for victims to be fully advised about the circumstances of release, should they wish to take up that opportunity, which is not always the case. Can I correct one of the points that I made in my earlier answer? I should have made reference to sexual assault as being the issue where constraints are applied in the legislation. And I don't think the characterisation that Mr Finlay expresses about mass early release isn't at all appropriate. The Government took steps to ensure our prison system was safe for those who work in our prison system, just as Mr Finlay's colleagues in the United Kingdom did. But the difference with this Government is that this Government came to Parliament and set out its case and asked for parliamentary consent to approve the steps that the Government was taking. That is what you do in a democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, the Institute for Fiscal Studies published a devastating report on the state of Scotland's NHS under the SNP. They said, and I quote, "Performance in the Scottish NHS remains below pre-pandemic levels across many measures. Even more concerningly, many measures of performance have continued to worsen over the last year." Most damningly, they point out that although the NHS in Scotland has proportionally higher spending and more staff, recovery in Scotland's health service is lagging behind the NHS in England on every measure. So does John Swinney accept that SNP incompetence and mismanagement is bad for Scotland's health?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the National Health Service in Scotland relies upon the commitment and the contribution of thousands and thousands of members of staff, the length and breadth of the country, and I want to record my thanks to them for the work that they put in to ensure that we are well cared for in the National Health Service. The NHS is recovering from the COVID pandemic and we are making progress in that respect. We know that there is more work that has got to be done, but we have seen improvements in the latest quarter for information that is available, with reductions to the size of the waiting list seen in both diagnostics and inpatient and day case activity, as well as an improvement in cancer performance into the bargain. So I accept that there is work that remains to be done to improve the performance of the National Health Service, but the Government is putting the investment and the focus in to enable that to be the case.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, it's not just patients being failed, it's staff being failed, so they will not take kindly to be used as human shields in the SNP Government's defence. Because John Swinney can try and spin the facts all he likes, but the devastating incompetence of the SNP is clear to see. And towards the end, he was focusing on inputs. Actually, this Government needs to focus on outcomes. Because on Tuesday, it was revealed that the number of patients stuck on an NHS waiting list for over a year has now risen to more than 100,000. And there are now more than 863,000 patients on an NHS waiting list. That's equivalent to 1 in 6 Scots. And at the same time, we're carrying out 50,000 fewer operations compared to pre-pandemic levels, and delayed discharge has soared. So when will John Swinney stop defending the indefensible, admit that his SNP Government has failed and change direction?
First Minister.
I think what members of the workforce in the National Health Service will welcome is the investment this Government has made to ensure that NHS staffing is up by 26% in the period between when this Government came to office and where we stand now. And on specific examples, in cancer care, for example, the consultant oncologist workforce has increased by 50.4% over the last 10 years. So the Government is investing in our NHS staff, and into the bargain we're putting in place pay settlements which have meant that we have not had to suffer and endure industrial action within the National Health Service in Scotland. Now, I would point out to Mr Sarwar that the number of patient waits for one of the 8 key diagnostic tests at the end of September showed a decrease of 7.4%. And we also saw in the most recent data that 73.2% of patients were treated on time within the 62-day cancer waiting times, which is higher than it was in the previous quarter. So what I would say to Mr Sarwar is I'm the first to acknowledge that we have challenges in recovering from the COVID pandemic, but the Government is making the investment and making the interventions to ensure that our National Health Service performs in a fashion that meets the needs of the people of Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
That answer again demonstrates that the First Minister has his head in the sand. The IFS make the point. We have disproportionately higher spending here in Scotland, and we have more staff, but we have poorer performance. That points to not staff being wrong, not resources being wrong, but a failure of leadership and a failure of government. Because the uncomfortable reality for John Swinney is that no public service in Scotland is safe from SNP incompetence. On his watch, our NHS has plunged into a doom loop of soaring waiting lists and poorer health outcomes. Our schools, once the envy of the world, have seen collapsing standards and rising violence. Our prisons left in tatters, with prisoners being let out early because of mismanagement of our criminal justice system, and our housing sector in disarray with soaring homelessness and spiralling rents. The fact is that after 17 years of the SNP, every institution in Scotland is weaker. So can I ask John Swinney, how many people have to lose their lives? How many patients have to go private? How many people have to be trapped in hospital? And how many staff have to be pushed to breaking point before he accepts that he and his government has failed and that Scotland needs a new direction?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, on a whole range of different elements of policy, the Government is delivering the progress that people in Scotland require. In the face of 14 years of austerity from the Conservative Government on housing, this Government has built more affordable houses per head of population than in England or Wales and in the period when the Labour Party were in government in Scotland, in the face of Tory austerity from London. Now, if Mr Sarwar believes that the solution to all of our problems in Scotland is the election of a Labour government, I would ask him to go and have a conversation with pensioners in Scotland today. Because in the first few months of a Labour government, pensioners in this country have been betrayed by the Labour government, who promised change, and all they did was slash the financial support for pensioners in our country by cutting the winter fuel payments. If that's what change means, Scotland doesn't need change, it needs progress under an SNP government.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
World leaders have once again failed to make progress at the Global Climate Conference. They all know the urgency of transitioning away from fossil fuels. The public gets it too. And polling from the think tank Uplift shows that here in Scotland, most business leaders are backing the transition to a fossil-free energy system. Yet the Scottish Government has still not published, not set out, the new energy strategy that's supposed to shift Scotland away from fossil fuels. It's still sitting on the First Minister's desk nearly 2 years after the draft was published. Scotland needs clarity, a renewables industry and the energy workforce need clarity, and Parliament needs to see this strategy too, so that we can see whether the Scottish Government is funding it properly. Will the First Minister finally end this delay and publish the strategy before next week's budget?
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government's direction on energy policy and on renewables is absolutely crystal clear, and it was demonstrated by the Green Industrial Strategy that the Government published, which gives all the certainty in the world about this Government's devotion and dedication to ensuring we make the transition to a green economy through the support of renewable energy in Scotland. Mr Harvey knows that over the period since 1990 we have halved our emissions in Scotland, we have effectively decarbonised our electricity networks, and we are taking and making the investments to enable us to deliver the transition to net zero. All of these themes will be reflected in the Government's budget next week. In relation to the energy strategy, Mr Harvey will know that some of the judgments and issues within that energy strategy are informed and influenced by recent court decisions, and the Government is taking time to ensure that we properly reflect on those issues in the formulation of the energy strategy, and it will be published when those conclusions have been reached.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, the lack of this strategy doesn't give the clarity that the First Minister is claiming exists. He tells us again that his priorities include tackling the climate emergency. Driving down emissions from transport will be a key part of achieving that. That's why during our time in government, the Scottish Greens cut the cost of public transport with free bus travel for under 22s and scrapping peak time rail fares. Because we know that cutting fares is critical to drive up public transport use and drive down emissions. But instead of continuing that work, the First Minister has brought back peak rail fares, undermining climate action and increasing the cost of living. The Scottish Greens have now set out plans for a national bus fare cap to ensure that nobody pays more than £2 for their regular bus journey. So can the First Minister see that public transport costs need to come down, and will he commit now to making this plan happen?
First Minister.
Well, the Government has delivered reductions in the cost of travel for many, many people in Scotland, not least of which the under-22 population, who now enjoy free bus travel around the country. And I think it's a very welcome development and a welcome step that assists and supports the involvement in the mobility of young people within our society. Now, obviously, we've taken forward steps in relation to peak fares. We extended the pilot exercise to establish if there was an evidence base to demonstrate that that sufficiently justified the investment of public money to meet the climate objectives that we had. Unfortunately, the public investment did not justify the steps that were being undertaken. And as Mr Harvey knows, the financial pressures on the Government are such that we have to be very careful about the judgments we make in that respect. And obviously, we'll reflect on all of these questions as we consider the Government's budget and take forward the steps that are necessary to ensure we achieve our objectives on net zero.
Question number 4, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the UK Government's reported allocation of between £295 million and £330 million to cover the increase in employer national insurance contributions for the public sector in Scotland.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, if the figures that were reported this week are all that is provided, that will mean that the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be shortchanging services the public depend upon by over £400 million.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for that reply. In evidence to the Finance and Public Administration Committee on Tuesday, the Office for Budget Responsibility confirmed that Labour's national insurance hike means employees will be £800 a year worse off as a direct result of Labour's budget, with low-paid workers disproportionately impacted. Business investment will fall by £25,000 million and taxes rise £62,200 million a year by 2029-30, while the UK economy will continue to stagnate, growing only 4.3% between 2019 and 2028. Does the First Minister agree that if this is what a Labour government looks like, independence can't come soon enough?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Gibson knows that the economic damage done to this country by one of the biggest decisions taken as part of the United Kingdom, the decision about Brexit, has inflicted significant economic damage on the Scottish economy, which is one of the arguments for independence, because we would be able to resume our participation in the European Union. The employers' national insurance contributions change is an indication of the fact that the public finances of the United Kingdom are in such a weak position that action of that type has got to be taken. But it is damaging the Scottish economy as well because of the financial burden it places on public services, on businesses and on organisations that we depend upon, who do not, as things stand, do not appear to be being compensated by the United Kingdom Government, such as GPs, social care, colleges and early learning and childcare. So Mr Gibson is absolutely right to point out the damage that has been done to the Scottish economy by these measures, and independence can't come soon enough to address these issues.
Coy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's good to see that the First Minister hasn't changed the record. The SNP has made a policy decision both to have a larger civil service in Scotland and to pay them more, despite failing to deliver meaningful public sector reform. Isn't the blame for the national insurance cash crisis that this government now faces down to the economic incompetence of both governments? The SNP for allowing the public sector to become too big, and Labour for using national insurance as a means to claw back the vast amounts of money
Let's hear
it has
Mr.
committed
Hoy.
to above inflation pay increases in the public sector.
First Minister.
I think every day as First Minister is a day where I learn something new. And today what I learned is that Craig
First
Hoy...
Minister, First Minister, if I might stop you. I'd be very grateful if members would just cease commenting from a sedentary position. When you've not been called to speak, please don't. First Minister.
And, Presiding Officer, my new piece of learning today is that Craig Hoy, a Conservative, has decided it's a good idea to come to Parliament and lecture me about economic incompetence after what his government inflicted on the people of the United Kingdom. I can't remember, so I may be saying something that's not backed up by fact, but I know that Mr Finlay was a great supporter of Liz Truss. Yeah. I suspect Craig Hoy was a great supporter of Liz Truss. There were tons of them over there. And So it wasn't me. It wasn't me. Craig Hoy was not a supporter of Liz Truss. He was probably a supporter of one of the other economic incompetents in the Tories that damaged our economy.
I call Michael Mara.
Does the First Minister recognise that the very reason Scotland is receiving an unprecedented additional £5 billion in the budget is because the UK Labour government has taken tough decisions to raise additional revenue? And what would the First Minister say to the Office for Budget... Mr Mara. What would the First Minister say to the Office for Budget Responsibility, who told the Parliament's Finance Committee this week that without the necessary tax changes, governments would, and I quote, see your debts rise and rise forever. Governments can't provide more and more public services as a share of the economy and not pay for them without seeing their debts reach an unsustainable level?
First Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to Mr Mara for putting those comments on the record. I'm sure there were other things that the Office for Budget Responsibility said which were possibly not quite as convenient to Mr Mara's narrative than the ones that he's selected today. But can I just say to Mr Mara that we are about to go through a process in which we're all going to have to make a contribution to deciding what is actually allocated to different policy areas within Scotland. And Mr Mara and all of his colleagues over there are not innocent bystanders in this process. They can act to assist and support the Scottish... Well, I'm not sure Mr Mara is interested in listening to my answer the way he's shouting at me, but all I would say to Mr Mara is this. If he wishes to see the resources that have been allocated as part of the United Kingdom budget process spent within Scotland, then this Parliament has to pass a budget, and the responsibility is on Mr Mara to vote for the government's budget.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Given that it is reported that the rise in national insurance contributions for employers will overwhelm the finances of charities, such as the SSPC, and I declare an interest as a member, with an estimated £400,000 per annum increased cost, twice the cost of feeding all the animals in their care, have there been any discussions with the UK Government on the financial damage to the charitable sector in Scotland, such as the SSPC, because they cannot pass these costs on to anybody? They must cut what they deliver.
First Minister.
I do fear that the warning that Christine Graham puts to Parliament today is one that will be... Well, I don't fear, I know it is one that is testing many charities and third sector organisations the length and breadth of the country, because they have simply seen, or they will see at the start of April, an overnight increase in their costs without the revenue to support the activities. And the SSPCA that Christine Graham puts to me, which I know is an organisation she cares deeply about from her commitment to these issues of animal welfare, will be facing difficulties. I know representations have been made to the United Kingdom Government in this respect, and obviously I'm concerned from a Scottish Government perspective that organisations that we depend upon to deliver services in Scotland will not be assisted by the changes that have been made.
Question number 5, Meghan Gallacher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to reduce the length of time that children are placed in temporary accommodation.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, additional investment of £42 million in affordable housing this year has been targeted to 5 local authorities with sustained temporary accommodation pressures. This funding is to increase the supply of social and affordable homes, including larger properties suitable for families, through acquisitions and bringing empty social homes back into use. This is, of course, in addition to the record funding of more than £14 billion that the Government is allocating to local authorities to deliver a range of services, including homelessness services.
Meghan Gallacher.
In 2008, 9,535 people were living in temporary accommodation. In 2024, 16,330 people are living in temporary accommodation. This government is presiding over disgraceful waits in temporary housing. One of the most appalling cases was a child spending over 7 years in temporary accommodation in Edinburgh, with another person spending close to 2,900 days without a permanent home. The SNP has been in power for 17 years, yet things go from bad to worse. Does the First Minister believe a child should spend 7 years in temporary accommodation? And when will this government finally get a grip of this situation that should shame him and his government?
First Minister.
President Officer, as I set out in my answer to Anna Sawar earlier on, in the face of 14 years of Conservative austerity, this government has built an average of 7,750 affordable homes each year since 2007. That's an average of 40% more per annum than the period 1999 to 2007. It's 45% more affordable homes delivered per head of population than in England and 70% more than in Wales during a period of intense austerity from the Conservative government. Now, I don't want people to be living in temporary accommodation. That's why the government is trying to take steps to improve the availability of rented accommodation. That's what will be part of the housing bill that Parliament considers this afternoon, and I hope Parliament will support the government in the measures that we're bringing forward to strengthen and to expand housing stock in Scotland.
Question number 6, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the First Minister for what reason at least 69,000 patients reportedly waited more than an hour to be triaged in A&E departments in the first half of this year.
First Minister.
President Officer, it's important for me to stress that people who are seriously unwell or their condition is life-threatening, initial triage will have started by paramedics before they arrive at hospital, with A&E staff put on standby for the patient's arrival for an immediate further assessment. Nonetheless, any unnecessary delay is not acceptable, and we are working with NHS boards through our improvement programme to reduce delays at every part in the patient journey to minimise risk and improve patient outcomes.
Baillie.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? But the reality, as he knows, is that the longer people are forced to wait for that initial assessment, the greater the chance that their condition deteriorates. But this speaks to the bigger problem in our NHS. And Dr Fiona Hunter from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine in Scotland said that long waits for triage are yet another indicator of a system which is not functioning as it should. The IFS report demonstrated clearly that the NHS in Scotland is underperforming despite the hard work of the staff. The First Minister is not an innocent bystander. After 17 years in power, does the First Minister accept that it is his government that is failing our NHS, our hard-working NHS staff and the patients in Scotland?
First Minister.
Jackie Baillie will know that in accident emergency departments, the length and breadth of Scotland, the performance across the whole country is better on 4-hour waits than in other parts of the United Kingdom. Now, it's not good enough, it's not where it should be, but it's better than other parts of the United Kingdom. Now, what we also have to focus on are some of the practical issues that affect that performance. Some of it is about the demonstration of demand, because we are dealing with an increasingly frail population made more frail by the consequences of the COVID pandemic. We are also dealing with acute intense activity within our hospital estate, which is why the government is putting such an effort into trying to reduce delayed discharge to ensure that we free up the opportunity for patients to make the journey through hospital care and to return to their homes where that is possible to do so. So these are the practical interventions that the government is making to address the situation and to ensure that our accident and emergency system and the initial assessment of patient condition can be undertaken as speedily and effectively as possible.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. If we are all concise, we will be able to fit more members in. And I call Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. New research from PwC confirms Scotland is leading the UK in the creation of green jobs, with the number tripling since 2021. And this comes despite the news that Labour's big plans to create green jobs, with the promised 1,000 GB energy jobs in the North East, is now watered down to around 200 to 300 posts based in Aberdeen. So what steps is the SNP Scottish Government taking to deliver a just transition for the North East, as opposed to the empty promises we are hearing from the UK Government?
First Minister.
So, the Scottish Government is committed to facilitating a just transition for the North East of Scotland. We have committed to over £500 million of investment through the Just Transition Fund to support that journey, maintaining and creating jobs in low-carbon industries and contributing to the region's future prosperity. We've dedicated £11 million for a package of skills interventions, including the Energy Skills Transition Hub, for example, and allocated over £75 million to help projects and communities across the North East of Moray to create jobs, support innovation and secure the highly skilled workforce for the future.
Thank you. Tim Eagle.
Is that on? Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I quickly remind members of my register of interest as a farmer? Today, the NFUS have gathered hundreds of farmers from across Scotland outside of Parliament. Thousands more will be watching from all of our constituencies across Scotland. Whether it's due to Labour's cruel family farm tax, the lost or stolen View Review money, or the lack of commitment from this SNP government over multi-annual funding, farmers are worried about the future. They're worried about their own future, they're worried about their children's future, and they're worried about their businesses. All eyes are on Scotland for the budget. So what reassurances will the First Minister give today to all those farmers standing outside?
First Minister.
I don't think Mr Eagle helps the farming industry by...
The First Minister.
I don't think Mr Eagle helps the farming industry by using language like lost or stolen money. What language is that for a Member of Parliament to use? I've given a cast-iron commitment that the £46 million will be put into the Rural Affairs budget of the Scottish Government so that farmers can appreciate that investment. That is a commitment from me, and Mr Eagle should take it seriously. As for the inheritance tax changes, I am deeply troubled by what is happening as a result of these changes. I represent a large rural constituency with many involved in farming. The inheritance tax changes will be catastrophic for the sustainability of family farming. So the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs have both written to the United Kingdom Government to point out some of the issues which I think the UK Government has skated past in their rush to put this particular provision in place that will be deeply damaging to the farming industry. And for Mr Eagle to put any point to me about multi-annual funding when the Conservative Government failed to deliver multi-annual year funding and inflicted the shambles of Brexit on the farming industry in Scotland is an absolute joke.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week it was reported that despite handing at least £4 million to health boards since 2022 to deliver health checks for vulnerable Scots who have a learning disability and promising that these would be completed by March 2023, as of this year not a single board has met that target and some boards have offered no checks at all. This week the Equalities Committee was told by individuals who have a learning disability that they feel like they, quote, remain unheard and are not a priority for Scotland. So can I ask the First Minister, what has happened to that £4 million given to health boards for their unfulfilled promise? What is going to be done to rectify this failure? And will he now apologise to those vulnerable Scots with learning disabilities who have been let down by his government yet again?
First Minister.
I'm not familiar with the issue that Mr O'Kane puts to me today. If we've allocated £4 million to health boards, I would expect health boards to have followed up and delivered that and applied that. So I will investigate this in the light of the exchanges today, and I'll reply in full to Mr O'Kane.
Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week marks the beginning of the global 16 Days of Activism campaign to tackle and prevent violence against women and girls. And this is key to creating a society where women and girls can live safely. With this in mind, can I ask the First Minister what action his government is taking to reduce violence against women and girls?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I welcome the question from Karen Adam? I had the privilege on Friday to launch the 16 days of activism on violence against women and girls in Perth, in my home city, and to commit myself as a local Member of Parliament and as First Minister to take the necessary action to address this totally unacceptable curse in our society. What has got to change here is the behaviour and attitudes of men, and I commit in this Parliament to give the leadership necessary to ensure that is the case. And across government, the work that we take forward in our Equally Safe strategy is the focal point for our interventions to ensure this scourge is addressed.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The well-known road safety campaigner Neil Gregg says that the Scottish Government's proposal to cut the single carriageway speed limit from 60 miles an hour to 50 miles per hour is a cheap gimmick which would do little to reduce death and injury. His words, not mine. What this would do is increase journey times and costs for many rural road users, including those who use key routes such as the A9 and A96. So instead of going down this route, why don't the Scottish Government improve road safety by finally delivering on its promise to fully dual both the A9 and A96?
First Minister.
So the Government remains committed to the dualling of the A9 and the A96 and are taking.
Let us hear the First Minister.
And are taking the practical steps to advance those projects. In relation to the questions on road speed, there is a consultation underway. The reason why we're having a consultation is that there are different opinions about how best to tackle this particular issue. Because I am regularly pressed, as is the Transport Secretary, on the number of fatalities and accidents on our roads. And we would be neglecting our duty if we do not examine what are the possible options to address that situation. So I hear the comments that Mr Fraser puts on the record from an individual that I know well and who I know contributes on this subject significantly. But we have to engage, if Members of Parliament want us to address the issue of fatalities on our roads, we have to explore what are the options to do that, and that's what the Government is doing.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Human Rights Commission report into the economic, social and cultural rights in the Highlands and Islands makes desperate reading. It states that urgent action is needed regarding access to health care to eradicate ruthlessness and hunger in the region, and yet the Scottish Government has shelved its Human Rights Bill. Can I therefore ask the First Minister whether he will work with me to progress my member's bill to enshrine the right to food into Scots law in a bid to start addressing the report findings?
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government, of course, will engage with Rhoda Grant on her legislative proposal. In relation to the needs of individuals in rural and island communities, especially in the Highlands and Islands, the Government takes forward a range of interventions on healthcare, on transportation, on other aspects of public services which are designed to address the challenges set out in the Human Rights Commission report, and that will remain the focus of the Government as we take forward our programme for intervention in Scotland.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
Presiding Officer, the latest figures from Social Security Scotland show that since their launch, the Scottish Government's 5 family payments have paid over £1 billion to families across Scotland to help end child poverty. Meanwhile, the Labour UK Government at Westminster is maintaining the cruel 2-child cap, which has forced thousands more children into poverty since Labour came to office, including in my Dundee City West constituency. Can the First Minister say more about the actions the Scottish Government has taken to tackle poverty against the backdrop of disastrous Westminster policy making?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, modelling that was published in February this year estimated that Scottish Government policies would keep 100,000 children out of relative poverty this year, including keeping an estimated 60,000 children out of relative poverty through investment in our Scottish Child Payment alone. Our 5 family payments are providing financial support to families which could be worth around £25,000 by the time an eligible child turns 16, compared to less than £2,000 south of the border. And on the question of the two-child limit, I am deeply concerned that that remains part of the welfare system within the United Kingdom. I'm stunned that an incoming Labour government has not removed that anachronism from the welfare system because it is condemning more and more children to live in poverty, and it should have been one of the first actions of a Labour government to remove that cap.
Absolutely.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 2,000 patients of the Lerwick dental practice have been notified by text that they will be deregistered and will be left without care by early next year. Another 4,000 patients are at risk of deregistration. Just this morning, I heard from a constituent, one of those 2,000 patients, who says, and I quote, "I'm in tremendous pain with toothache and on phoning the dentist for emergency treatment, as this is all I can access now. I eventually got through, only to be told they'd see what they could do and phone me back." She's still waiting for the call back. It's clear the independent high street model of dentistry is failing NHS patients, and in Shetland disproportionately so, as there's no alternative. Talk of long-term strategies does little to ease the agony for patients with toothache. So does the Scottish Government agree that everyone in Scotland should be able to access routine NHS dental care? And if so, will the First Minister ensure that the model of delivery is re-examined, as the current system is quite clearly failing my constituents in Shetland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I've been briefed by officials on this developing situation in Shetland, and I understand that my officials have met with the board to discuss this as a matter of urgency. The latest news is undoubtedly a regressive step, and the Public Health Minister will be overseeing through officials that appropriate mitigations are in place to ensure that the legitimate aspirations that Beatrice Wishart has put to me today are fulfilled for her constituents in the Shetland Islands. So this will be an issue that will have the focused attention of the Public Health Minister, who will be happy to engage with Ms Wishart on this question.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' business debate in the name of Christine Graham, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and public gallery to do so.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.